We give people the freedom to work from anywhere. So, why do so many teams still feel trapped? That's our question today. Since the pandemic, and despite aggressive return to office efforts aimed at clawing back control, remote work has firmly taken root in the modern workplace. Organizations invested in tools, adopted virtual workflows, and promised more flexibility. And yet, many teams remain micromanaged. Performance is still measured by screen time, and managers quietly, and sometimes not so quietly, complain that remote workers aren't as visible. What we've really done is given teams physical freedom while rebuilding the old control structures in digital form. It's a perfect example of System X thinking, assuming people are lazy and can be trusted. So they have to be monitored and controlled. That's the mindset. This is a critical conversation, especially as AI enables even more distributed and asynchronous ways of working. Think about it. Do you really want to limit your AI implementation capabilities to a 30-mile commute radius? In a global talent market? That's not just outdated, it's risky. Let's talk about how to move beyond digital surveillance in the workplace and actually build autonomous, high performing distributed teams. So, the first thing we need to understand is that just because we have remote work tools doesn't mean that we have remote autonomy. Tools, yep, they're very important. They enable communication, but they don't necessarily enable decision making freedom, which is what's important, especially in distributed teams. Misuse of the tools often reinforces visibility based control. We use them not for the good, but for ulterior motives. Whether we're aware of it or whether it's a subconscious drive that's making us leverage the data that becomes available from the tools for purposes other than what the tools were intended. That's very common. True autonomy requires that we change our culture, not just use software and hardware to facilitate remote work. The tools don't guarantee that distributed teams will succeed. It's the working agreements that lead to the success. Another thing that we have to deal with is the rise of the digital always on culture. Workers feel pressured to appear like they're active rather than focusing on being effective. It's this focus on whatever I'm doing is just I have to make sure that I'm looking like I'm busy. Are you really busy? Are you busy in something that's really important, something that's really meaningful? It's a big difference. The focus, we're reinforcing the active perspective, and we're not talking as much about the effectiveness. Status check meetings and always online expectations increase stress. People are constantly just looking over their shoulders, worried, as opposed to focusing on the work. That's what we want for people's focus to be on, not on performing correctly and complying. This kind of relationship with the workers mimics in office micromanagement. Yes, we may not be physically close together, but it's the same type of behavior. It's somebody hovering over you, it's somebody just watching every single move, making sure that you're working in line. And that's micromanagement. And unfortunately, it mirrors the social media behaviors. And so this is really a society ill. It's every aspect of our daily lives is being affected by this expectation that we're always on. People in their friendships get offended because we didn't reply right away. Reply where? What did you put where? I don't know what you're talking about. We've met in person 3 times since then. You haven't said anything. And you're offended because I didn't reply to your whatever social platform post. We're normalizing things that aren't normal. So we see a lot of common failure patterns when we engage in this way of thinking. It says managers equate silence to disengagement. I'm sorry, I could just be thinking about the thing that I need to do. Teams default to waiting for direction instead of initiating. We're so frustrated from a leadership perspective. I hear it all the time. It's like the teams are not sufficiently engaged. They criticize individuals. They're not invested. They're not engaged in what they're doing. Well, if all that we've done is conditioned everybody to act when we tell them to do something, why would we expect otherwise? People are conditioned to wait for the manager to say what to do, and then they do it. They're not in condition to think for themselves and to really want to do something. It's just about meeting a standard and an expectation, not about engagement, which is what we want. We've created the conditions for people to wait for direction. So in this way of working, we grant autonomy in name, but we don't really in practice. And when this ends up happening, the result of not succeeding is that there's a lot of redo work that happens. So there's a real cost, there's a real tangible loss of revenue that happens when we behave this way. A lot of redo needs to be done. Why? Because there's been a miscommunication, there's been a misalignment in expectations. There's a lack of clarity about the deliverables, about decision rights, about the roles to get the work done. Under those conditions, people end up doing the best that they can under the conditions, but later on we discover that there was a disconnect and we have to redo things. That's very costly and very time consuming. This is not an efficient way to work. Another thing that we need to consider is the psychological foundations related to remote trust, building remote trust. The distance, the physical distance creates a perceived risk. Whether it's real or not, there's the perception that there's increased risk. Again, it's something that I can't see, so I don't know. So therefore, I fear it. Is the risk real? Sometimes, and sometimes no, not at all. In fact, the opposite may be true. The lack of visual cues triggers unconscious distrust. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that we go into it with the expectation that people are being lazy, not doing the right things, whatever, but there's this unconscious distrust because we can't see it. I understand, I get it. Now you're blindfolded, so yeah, that's going to make you nervous. Fair. And we need to get past that, because otherwise we are undermining potentially really good workers who are doing really good things. The managers feel losing control and visibility of the work, and I totally get that and understand that. When I started off on my agile journey and I was confronted with this, it really is scary because you're faced with the dilemma of you have all this responsibility on making sure that your teams deliver and perform, and yet you don't know what's going on. You don't have all the details, every single little detail. And especially if you're a manager who's got a bit of a perfectionist streak, that really is scary. That really can make for a very, very difficult transition for you. I get it. I've been there. I know exactly what it feels like. And we need to get past that. Because when we finally are able to create a truly empowered, autonomous team, wonderful things start happening. And it's so much easier. We have to be involved in fewer things and make fewer decisions. And the decisions that we have to make are really important, really big ones. And we're not overwhelmed as leaders with all of the details, tracking every single one of them, making decisions for everything. We just focus on making the really big, meaningful decisions. That's wonderful. We finally have the mental space to do it. So there's a perception of perceived uncertainty when we are dealing with remote workers. And we need to figure out how to get past that, because that becomes a block in itself to helping us fully have empowered autonomous teams. So how do we manage that uncertainty? We manage it through culture, not through oversight, not through tools. The clarity of purpose. When we establish clear purpose with our teams, that reduces the need for micromanagement. The clearer that we are, the more that we can have that handshake and the understanding of what it is that we're going to be doing, the better the results are going to be. We can walk away coming back with the expectation that things are progressing in the direction that we expected. We don't just simply establish the context and the shared understanding and the agreement and walk away and don't pay attention. That's laissez-faire. That's dangerous. We establish that and we follow through in a reasonable, low friction type of interactions that give us enough information to get confirmation of where we're heading, without falling to the micromanagement. So there's a fine line that we need to be careful not to cross. Now, I understand it's scary, And especially at the beginning, where teams don't know how to operate this way, yeah, they're probably going to make mistakes. So we need to build up trust. And that trust only comes from consistent delivery and open communications. So we need to create that psychological safety for teams to fail, and they will fail at the beginning, no question. And after a while, and they understand that they now have the ball, they're running with the ball. We expect them to get the ball to the goal line, and we're not going to do it for them. Then they start doing it, and they consistently deliver. Once we get to that point of consistent delivery, aided by open communication, transparency, we can see everything that's going on all the time. Now we can have that trust, and it makes it much easier from that point forward. It's a period that we need to go through. That's the difficult part. Once we're there, it becomes much easier. So overstructuring things for the purpose of controlling what's happening backfires because teams feel disempowered. That's going to lead to disengagement. That's going to then require the manager to issue more instruction, more direction, because the team is not doing it themselves. But we've created that environment that leads to that result. That's the thing that we need to be careful about and not assume that it's because the worker can't do it. The implementation teams are perfectly capable of doing it if we create the conditions for them to do so. Instead, we're creating the conditions for them not to think that way, not to feel that ownership. So it's up to the manager to do it. And at that point, it becomes a puppeteering. That's all that it is. That's micromanagement. So in virtual settings, there are trust building mechanisms that we can leverage. Like, for example, regular low friction check-ins. Instead of having these formal status meetings that are heavy, time consuming, and they seldom give us real information. It's usually staged information. It's not as clear and accurate. We just have low friction. And that's about building personal connections and just casual interactions. You can get a lot more information out of those than out of formal meetings. We share context, not just tasks. We talk about the context, why we're doing, what it is that we need to do, and why it's important. Who's involved? Who cares about this? Having conversations around that instead of conversations that focus on the tasks, that's going to be far more effective. Leave the tasks and the implementation to the teams. That's what we pay them for. Let them figure it out. They're masters of their own craft. Let them do that. Instead, focus on being clear about what it is that we need to do, why it's important, who cares about it. Those are the critical conversations to have. And we created a space where it's okay to be vulnerable and transparent. And that includes us as leaders. It's okay for us to come to the teams and say, you know, team, I'm getting really nervous. I'm not seeing the clear picture of where this is going. So could you help me out to give me a sense? I've had those conversations, and the teams usually react very well with that. Unless they're in the middle of something they really need me to just go away, they will take the time and explain to me. And that's great. That satisfies my immediate need. It conveys to them where I'm thinking, and it gives them the perspective of knowing what is useful to communicate to me and when. Having short feedback cycles is important, and having that frequent delivery will nurture both team and stakeholder level trust. So feedback cycles, as I said, this is not about just creating clarity on what and why we need to do things and for whom, and then you walk away and you don't pay attention, and then it's only at delivery time that you care. No, we really need to be more engaged, and this goes both directions, both from a leadership standpoint and from delivery implementation team standpoint. We need to have those active communications frequently, have data, have information flowing in both directions. That is what's going to build the trust. And over time, initially, we may need a lot of it. We're not accustomed to it. We're nervous. That's normal. Over time, we'll learn to trust, and we will both sides will learn what needs to be communicated and what doesn't need to be communicated. At the beginning, it'll be over communication. That's fine. Work past that, get to the comfort level, and then it'll be nice and smooth. And when we do this effectively, when we have good feedback mechanisms in place and it becomes part of the normal way of doing business, the teams, within the team itself, there's a lot of trust. because the team itself can trust each other that everything is moving as expected. And stakeholders also have trust because they can see. It's just as important to see when things are going well as it is when things are not going well. And then the stakeholders get to see how we recover. When we have this happening over and over and over again, it creates a nice rhythm of execution, which everybody knows they can trust and expect. So we talked about the psychological aspects and how they affect us. Let's now talk about the measurements and how those affect us too. And this activity-based metrics, they kill autonomy. I'm reminded of something that a former boss of mine, a good friend of mine, always said, and it's so, so, so true. What counts is what's counted and how we count it. You really want to think about that and remember it time and time again because it's so true. There's so much wisdom in that statement. What counts is what's counted and how it's counted. So, for example, if we're going to measure keystrokes and hours worked, we're sending a message, and it may not be the message that we want to be sending. Think about some implementations that horrify me that are happening, and I just simply don't understand how anybody can accept this and how anybody could conceive of creating it. It's really draconian. This concept of using cameras in order to measure the amount of eye time on screens, that is horrifying, and it leads to horrible behaviors. Let's say that in a company, we're encouraging that there needs to be a lot of collaboration and a lot of helping each other. And we go, 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 go. We all need to be teams and we all need to help each other and everything. And then we implement something like that, a system that's measuring the amount of time that my eyes are on that screen. Well, guess what? The next time that somebody comes around to ask me something, I'm not going to engage and go, hey, how are you? What's going on? How can I help you? Oh, yes, please tell me more about it. And have a connection, a human connection with them. Absolutely not. I'm going to be right on my screen and going like, yeah, what is it? Okay, hurry up. Yeah, tell me. Sure. Yeah, I don't know. Oh, okay, sure. Bye. That's it. And people are going to start complaining. It's like, well, I'm no longer getting any help. The teams are, well, what do you expect? If we've created a system where we're measuring people's eyes, how long they are on screens, guess what they're going to do? They're going to keep those eyes on the screen, and everything else, I don't care. Why? Because the thing that's going to ding me, the thing that's going to punish me, the thing that's going to judge me is going to be that measurement. It's horrible that people are doing that. It's absolutely horrible, atrocious. It's destroying human interactions. We want to shift our focus from the compliance, the monitoring, the measurement of people and how they're working, to the outcome. Whatever way they're doing it, however they're doing it, who cares? Are we getting to the outcome? That's the important piece. Are we delivering on the outcome that we all agreed? That's what matters. If we're doing that, who cares how we got there? It doesn't matter. What matters is that we delivered it. That's what matters. What matters is that our customers got what they needed. Maybe part of it is not delivering what they asked for, but delivering what they needed. And that happened because somebody was really engaged in the conversations, in the understanding what the real problem was. That doesn't happen when people are just executing to order. If we get the outcomes that we need or better outcomes than we expected, that's what matters. How we got there, who cares? And if we have somebody really, really, really smart who can figure this out while they're walking around the park, because that's what gives them inspiration, and then they come back and in 5 minutes they were able to do something that would have taken hours to do, why do we care? I can tell you from my own personal experience, I can recall many times when I was trying to solve some really, really, really big mental puzzles. And this was mental gymnastics to figure things out. Where was I? Yeah, I was by the lakes at work near the lake, near the office, because that was the place where my mind was at peace. I had a positive environment around me that was very inspirational. And that was the place where I could think the best. In the office, no, it was very difficult. By the measurements of how long my eyes are on the screen, I was a worker who wasn't engaged, who wasn't doing any work. Not true. The opposite is true. So we've got to be really careful with these measurement tools. They do absolutely horrendous impact on teams. So we want to, overall, what we want is encouraging performative work rather than just um, having a performative work that's delivering on the needs of the customer. Not just having quantitative work, volume of work, hours of work completed. It's delivering, the performance metric is delivering the value that the customer is going to appreciate. That's the key. Everything else is secondary. So with that, we want to be focused on those outcome focused metrics. That's what sends trust signals. We emphasize on what's being delivered, not how many hours and what are the steps to get there. We align the measurement of the goals to the customer value. And this allows for diverse ways of working styles and time zones. If somebody works their best when they work really intensely for a while, and then they take a break, half-hour break, an hour break, 2 hours break, who cares how long they break, and they come back to it, and then they finish their work, maybe work beyond the standard work hours, but they get things done and delivered, great. Diverse working styles, we need to be mindful of that. We all understand, for example, when learning, different people learned in different ways. Some people learn by listening, others by seeing, otherwise by doing. They're different learning styles. And we understand that, and we allow for people to learn in the way that they learn best. This is the same thing. How do people work? Well, different people work in different ways. Allow diverse working styles. That's how we're going to get the best out of everybody in our team. So we want to avoid measuring hours and keystrokes and amount of time and eyeballs on screens and focus instead on team delivery and customer satisfaction. That's the key thing. Next, we want to think about transparency without surveillance. We can have transparency that gives us a lot of information. In fact, it gives us better and real-time information without using it or implementing surveillance. So for example, Kanban style visibility allows us to not just see the flow, but see real-time flow and be able to take a big picture view of everything that's happening, everything that's going on at any time. Once we've established within the team the norm that you do something, you update the board, as you're doing things, you update that board, we are all going to benefit from having that real-time information. The team benefits because everybody can see where there's potential trouble. Leadership can benefit because likewise, they can see where the overall progress is going and where it may not be. It facilitates help. If we see that something is stuck from a leadership perspective, we can now have a reason to stop by and say, is there something that we can do to help? Because we see that we are falling behind. How can we help? This is what happens when we have that real-time feedback information. If we wait for the reports, that's too late. So there's a real benefit to having that transparency. When we're talking about what the team has accomplished, okay, for example, we have sharing the outcomes during demos, reviews, story-based updates. We have those conversations about what's going on. That information is really valuable for all people in the organization, not just for the team. So make sure to share that information as broadly and openly as possible. And that visibility, when we share what's happening, how we're performing, how we're working, what we're doing, what we're accomplishing, what we're delivering, that enables help to come. We use it to help, not to inspect, not to grade. This is the way that we established a healthy working relationship that is going to nurture that autonomy and teams being able to perform in a self-managed way. Communication. Communication is another thing that we want to take into account. And this was really important with distributed teams, especially teams that work worldwide. This becomes so much more important and also so much critical. Wow. Sorry about that. I appear to have lost my voice. It's coming back. Okay, so communication. Especially in distributed teams worldwide, There is a real big challenge, and this can get really tricky. If you've got team members that are in the United States, and then others in India, and others in China, oh boy, now you've got a really complicated scenario to try to orchestrate. And this is where we make a decision of which communications have to be synchronous and which communications need to be asynchronous. That's going to be so important for the team to succeed. Synchronous communications definitely necessary for collaboration, but when we need to do deep work, asynchronous communication is perfectly fine. Avoid forcing a single standard for communications and recognize that sometimes asynchronous is perfectly fine. Conversely, don't over abuse asynchronous communications when you really need to be talking about it directly. So there needs to be a balance. So always look at the situation and apply the best type of communication to it. Don't overuse and don't underutilize. By defaulting meetings to a single communication style, you definitely could be imposing way too much and unnecessary pressure on teams, requiring them to do things that they don't really need to do. So if it's sufficient to have a synchronous direct message or email communication, use that. If you need to have that conversation, plan for that. Worked with many teams that they would have been perfectly happy to get up in the middle of their night, have a meeting, and go back to bed just because they recognized that it was necessary to have that interactive communication exchange because it was valuable both to them and to the team. They would have been perfectly happy to do that remotely without having to go into an office, of course, for the purpose of helping the team and helping the whatever work they're doing get done. Perfectly happy to do that. Most people are flexible. Most people will be happy to be flexible and do that. Instead, by requiring them to be at the office, physically at the office, that created too much pressure for them. They weren't happy and they didn't perform as well. I always say, I'm always happy to be even more flexible than the company is willing to be flexible with me. And that really has a lot of weight. A lot of people feel that way, and rightfully so. Another thing that we need to keep in mind is that when we're talking about worldwide organizations, there are time zone differences, and we need to respect that. And we need to respect that not just from not keeping people up too late, but also people's natural energy peaks. The time that we would want to get together may not be the best time for them to be meeting. All of this does require some careful coordination, and it gets tricky. I understand. However, with careful planning and good communication, we can do it. It just takes some effort and time. So overall, what you want to do is you want to align synchronous and asynchronous communications with the speed of decision making. That's the critical piece. If you don't need an immediate decision, then you don't need the entire team to be working on it together, then asynchronous is probably fine. Another thing that helps us with this is documentation. And the purpose of the documentation is to establish shared understanding, not to control. It's not a documentation to have a certificate of what's going on for the purposes of protecting ourselves. Hopefully, your work environment doesn't require that. And the documentation, when used properly, it can be really valuable, especially for those remote workers. When we write to clarify our thinking, not to create bureaucracy, that's powerful. When we have decision logs, for example, that document the journey that took us to the present moment, that's invaluable because now not only the teams implementing things, but also those who have to maintain and support it, they have a history. They can see the steps that led to the current state. That can be invaluable information. And when you're working with distributed teams, it doesn't matter the time zone, what's going on. The person who worked on this is not available or maybe no longer in the company. You have those decision points that you can go back to and figure out what happened. In aviation, this kind of information is invaluable. And whenever something happens, people go back and look because it gives you the trail of what happened. How did we get to this particular point? Distributed teams benefit from this information just as much. It makes things a lot easier. So you want to think of documentation as a way of teaching everybody in the present and people in the future, not as a way of tracking. That's not the right perspective on documentation. So good documentation used for for a proper purpose reduces friction and misunderstanding, and that helps the synchronous teams tremendously. Another thing that we want to do is make our decisions transparent and traceable. And this goes part of the documentation, which feeds into transparency. We want to clarify how decisions are made, who was involved, and why. And we want to default to public channels, unless privacy is necessary, of course. But the public channels are going to give broad visibility to everything that's going on, how we're making the decisions. And it's going to help everybody at all levels of the organization stay informed of what we're doing. That open visibility helps align their distributed efforts because everybody's on the same page. The opposite to that is you have a centralized group, usually in the headquarters and wherever the country the company resides, that's making the big decisions, and then everybody has to wait for that information to flow, often filtered across layers. It becomes a game of telephone. It's not effective, and oftentimes it leads to a lot of miscommunication and misunderstanding, which could be avoided if instead we have this centralized way of making decisions and publishing decisions that are accessible to everybody. And of course, there's leadership, as always. Leadership has a critical role. One of the things that you can do that can really help is role rotations. Um, I've talked about rotations before in the context of, for example, retrospectives, having the devil's advocate be an actual role that people play during retrospectives, and you rotate that. And the reason why you do that is because you want everybody to feel comfortable creating discomfort during these meetings for a purpose, not just simply to stir up trouble, but it's to exercise the skill of understanding how to raise contrary perspectives, how to work through them for a purpose of improving the decisions that the teams are making. That's in retrospective specifically. But in general, you can use that same mechanism of doing a role rotation because that unlocks distributed accountability. If everybody has a shared ownership, even if it's for a moment, if it's just a couple of times, it doesn't have to be all the time. But if people have a shared experience of what everybody else in the team is going through, that really helps increase their understanding of others' roles and what they need to be doing. That really builds empathy, understanding, and caring. So many times people fail to communicate something just because they don't know, they don't realize, they don't understand that somebody else needs that information. It's not that they've been hoarding, it's not that they didn't want to share it, it's that they just simply didn't understand. If we do a role rotation and people go through it, now they can see, they can understand. So when they're on the other side of, they'll be more mindful about it and they'll be able to do it. When we do this, it helps teams build broad capabilities, and that reduces bottlenecks. And it also helps create a more harmonious, more fluid, less friction type of relationship between different roles within teams and across teams. This can help you in the interactions with different teams, different areas of the organization. So it encourages empathy for different roles and responsibilities, which leads to better interactions with them and fulfilling what they need. Another thing that we want to consider from a leadership perspective is how leaders oftentimes fall to this expectation, self-imposed, and sometimes, yeah, indeed, others may have it, that just because of their title, they have to fulfill a particular mentoring, guiding, decision-making type of function. This is not true. We want to recognize expertise, not hierarchy. Because oftentimes the person is making decision just purely based on hierarchy is not making the best decision overall. So influence emerges through value that they're delivering to the teams and the insight, useful insight that's helping them, not just because they have the title. And we want to avoid defaulting to always following whoever is the loudest or is the most senior. So this doesn't necessarily have to apply to hierarchies within the organization. It can be within a team where everybody may be at the same role, but we listen to the most senior one because they've been there the longest. Okay, that's not necessarily true all the time. Somebody who's completely new to the team may come in with a fresh idea that sometimes may be the most valuable idea. Sometimes they just don't know and they need to experience the environment, gain more experience. Yes, that's fair. And sometimes they may have exactly the perspective that we need in order to unlock us from a way of doing things that has been prevalent for too long. So we need to really look at getting the help and the information that we need from those who have the expertise, not the title. And using facilitated formats to share this information can be really helpful. It can help address some friction and some discomfort. So this is where you can leverage the facilitation skills to help bring about the different perspectives so that everybody can be open to accepting them and considering them. So coordination, when we want teams to work together, coordination is really important. And that coordination emerges through structure and trust. When we have shared goals, the teams can coordinate the execution. So it's really important to give everybody something to focus on. Everybody's focused on the same thing. That's the anchor. That's what keeps everybody together. And then let the teams coordinate the execution. We encourage initiative taking and inter-team collaboration. So we leave it up to the implementation, the execution. We leave it up to the teams to do, and we encourage them to work together, both within the team and with other teams to get it done. Trust allows for faster decisions, and that happens at really expedited ways when the decisions are happening closer to the work that needs to be done, not at separated and distant layers, in the decision-making layers that are distant from the work that needs to be done. So there needs to be a tight alignment on the goals. That's the definition of the what we're doing, with a loose coupling on the execution, the how. For distributed teams, especially worldwide distributed, this is so critical because many times a centralized group that's trying to mandate the how may not be cognizant of regional, local considerations, cultural or pragmatic that affect the teams and the ability to do the work. And by trying to impose this standardized, normalized way of doing things across a worldwide organization, that's going to create friction, undoubtedly. So we need to decouple these two. Have a clear alignment on the goals. So everybody everywhere worldwide is working towards the same goal, and decouple it from the execution that allows for everybody to implement it in the best way that's possible within their region, within their locality, within their personal ability. So these two need to be decoupled. That's a very important and key element that if you focus on that, that will definitely improve. So many of your large corporations, especially the larger the corporation gets, the more that we tend to see this. If we can address this head on, that will start yielding some good results and improvements. So, having covered all that, when we don't do well, when we are not performing, and we're not moving in a good direction to implement autonomy, we get feelings of management not letting go. They're still entrenched in the implementation. That's not a good sign. Watch out for that. Or from the management side, we hear the statements, well, the teams don't take initiative. They're not engaged. That's another sign that we're not implementing the things that are necessary in order to succeed. We need alignment without control. That's the key. So we've all experienced the effects of micromanagement and control. We've seen ourselves how demoralizing it can be, how disempowering it is, and how it does not lead to us delivering the best work possible. We can do so much better when we have that freedom. So share in the comments anytime that you felt micromanaged remotely, and how did that make you feel? Were you able to overcome it? How did you overcome it? We'd all love to hear. And if you'd like to learn more about why managing the work implementation slows you to a failure, click one of these. I'll be happy to tell you all about it.